Twice a month, Paula Pant, host of the Afford Anything podcast, answers questions the listeners sent in. Today, her partner in crime, Will, joins in the fun. Here's one now.
Hi, Paula. This is Chris from the Washington, D.C. area. I really liked your blog post emphasizing investing rate over savings rate. It helped me realize my wife and I have about $50K in non-emergency fund, non-future allocated cash just sitting in savings that should be working harder for us. I'm intrigued by buy and hold rental property investing because of the strategy's differences from our current investment portfolio, which consists of two things, 401k money and the house that we live in. Our 401k assets total $155K. We bought our house a year and a half ago for $610,000 with $120,000 down, and we have a 3.875 interest rate. I like the idea of buy and hold rental properties because it diversifies us away from the stock market and gives us the prospect of passive income to be realized in early retirement, hopefully well before we're 59. I'm currently 29 years old. The only hesitancy I have comes from recent news. Have you seen the stories about a 3D printer having built a 400 square foot home for $10,000? What is your take on how this low-cost way of manufacturing houses will affect real estate investment returns from the perspective of a starter buy-and-hold rental property investor like me? What properties bought today will be least affected by the new technology? Will the technology affect investment returns I'd anticipate earning in 15 to 20 years to a substantial enough degree that you'd recommend index funds as the safer investment? Thanks, Paula. I know you'll remove any potential bias from being in the process of developing a course on real estate investing in answering this question. I'm looking forward to the course, by the way. Take care.
So here's why I love this question. Fundamentally, the question is, how will new technology affect the real estate market? So if you strip the specific detail about the 3D printer away, the broader question is, what advancements loom in the future, and how will that affect real estate investing? And that is actually something I've spent a lot of time thinking about. And the time that I've spent thinking about it has been inspired by a book that I highly recommend. I'm going to also link to it in the show notes. It's called The Inevitable by Kevin Kelly. Kevin Kelly is a founding editor of Wired magazine. He was around to witness the birth of the internet. He was like, hey, look at this. Nobody's claimed McDonald's.com yet. So he was around in the very early days, and he has this incredible book about what's looming on the horizon. And one of the primary things that he says, and by the way, Chris, I will specifically address the 3D printer later in the answer, but hold that for now. So one of the specific things that Kevin Kelly talks about is AR and VR, augmented reality, virtual reality, will be the next game changer. It will be the next electricity, the next personal computing, the next internet. It will be the next thing that changes everything. And some examples that he gives. Right now, if you want to learn how to weld, you have to generally find somebody who knows how to weld, watch what that person does, and then try to mimic or imitate what that person does. In the future, augmented reality / virtual reality will allow you to follow that person's hands and essentially be in that person's hands as they are going through the process. When I really stopped and I visualized that, like, mind equals blown. I mean, in terms of the way that will reshape everything we do. Okay, so to take this to a real estate application, right now, if you want to tour some homes that you're interested in buying, yeah, you can pull up an app on your phone that will tell you how much the home costs. And you can pull up some other apps that will give you an estimate of what that home might rent for, or what comparable homes in the area might rent for. And then you can kind of like squeegee together some numbers on a spreadsheet and do a little bit of rudimentary math and try to figure it out. Imagine a future in which we all have the future equivalent of Google Glass, whatever wearable that is, contact lenses. Imagine some type of a future in which when we look at a home, in our field of vision, we immediately see the price to rent ratio. We immediately see the cap rate. So I wouldn't have to tell somebody, here's a link to an article that has a PDF of a spreadsheet about how to calculate cap rates. I mean, how horse and buggy is that when in your field of vision, you've got that information digitally available to you right away? That is the future that I see. And imagine as you walk through the property, every item within the property has some type of a digital record of when it was installed, when it was serviced, and by whom it was serviced. So when you see the water heater, you don't have to hold a flashlight up to the water heater to look at the label and be like, oh, it says here this water heater was installed 6 years ago. You know, you can just scan a QR code or whatever the future version, the future analog of a QR code is, and you can see exactly who the service technician was. So you can call that person back if there's an issue. Maintenance is going to be, I think, a lot easier in the future once every item within the home is tied to some type of a digital record. And analyzing properties is going to be so much easier in the future. 3D tours of properties that tenants can take will be incredibly easier. So anyway, that I'm going off on a tangent a little bit about how excited I am about the effect that new technologies are going to have on real estate generally and real estate investing 10, 20 years from now. Now, to your specific question about 3D printing, I have a few thoughts on this. Number one is that I cannot imagine the mass market living in homes that are entirely 3D printed. I can imagine that being a niche market in the same way that tiny homes are a niche market today. So like the tiny home movement or the Airstream trailer movement, like that's a rapidly growing niche. That's not something that you heard about in the 1980s, but now it's avocado toast cool.
Printed on avocado toast.
Yeah, exactly. And that's great. I love that people are doing that. I think that's awesome. I've got friends who live in tiny homes, but that is not enough of a disruptor to affect the returns in the mass market. Tiny homes, I respect them fully. They are a movement, yes, but they are a niche. And they're a niche that does not affect the general overall picture.
Okay. I've got two things I'd say about this. Number one, so I went to engineering school, believe it or not.
And I don't.
And I don't. I will not be posting a link to my diploma online, so forget about it. So I went to engineering school, graduated in, I think, 2003 or something like that.
Uh-huh.
And even at that time, I remember there being engineer stories about 3D printed houses out of cement, basically. I mean, you know, this idea has been out there for a long time. At the time that I heard about it, it was, oh, you know, wouldn't this be great for like developing world applications? Because what they wanted to do is they wanted to basically use some sort of cement to 3D print. So they would have some sort of machine that would go around like a printer head and deposit cement slowly in layers over and over and over again, around and around. So anyway, that idea has been out there for a while. What I'd say about it is, you know, and I didn't read this article, but what I would say is probably, you know, when they were talking about, oh, you could build a house for $10,000, you frequently see these articles and they make, you know, pretty outrageous claims like that. It might be the case that you could build the frame of the house for $10,000 with the 3D printer, but what about the cabinets? What about the sewer line hookup? What about the roof? You know, what about the mechanicals, the hot water heater, the furnace, blah, 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 the wood flooring? You know, those aren't going to be 3D printed.
Well, the flooring wouldn't be wood. It would be cured cement, I would assume.
Sure. But
so, yeah, the materials may change.
Yeah, some of the materials may change, but I mean, at least for this foreseeable future, I imagine that 3D printing a house wouldn't be a complete thing. It would just be maybe the frame of it mostly. Mm-hmm. You know, you're not going to 3D print a window into place. You know, that isn't going to happen anytime soon. It might happen someday, but so that's like one thing is like that wouldn't probably represent the entire cost of the house. So I don't know how legitimate that number really would be, even if it were available today.
Right. And today, the cost of framing a house
is not that high.
Is A, not that high, and B, it fluctuates depending on cost of wood.
Right. So the second thing I would say is that I'm pretty certain that you and I have bought a house that would cost less than $10,000 for the house. So when you buy a property...
For the material cost, you mean?
Right. So when you buy a property, there's kind of two components to it, if you think about it, like you break it down. One of them is the underlying value of the land. The other one is the value of the improvements on the land. So these are broken out even in your tax record separately. The underlying land goes up and down with the market. The improvements on the land go down, basically.
Right. The improvements, the materials depreciate over
the
time.
house itself depreciates over time.
Depreciates over time.
So we bought a house one time for $21,500.
Oh, I think I got it down to 21 flat. They were asking 22 and I offered 20. And then we had this big long negotiation where they were like 21.5 and I was like 20, and we that went on for a while.
I do not doubt that. So anyway, we bought a house for 21 flat, and it was a 3-bedroom house in Atlanta. And I'm guessing that the value of the improvements, the house on that land, if you took that as a proportion, was probably close to zero.
Because it was really depreciated.
It was very depreciated. Yes.
Extremely depreciated.
Yeah,
and not just in the tax sense of the word.
Exactly. So would this radically change the market? I mean, not really, if that's the case, because you can buy a house today that for the improvement value is probably close to zero.
Right.
So that can happen.
In certain markets.
In certain markets, sure. So that can happen. So for those reasons, I just wouldn't worry about this thing too much, this particular news story. Because A, that number may not reflect the total cost of construction. I mean, there's a lot that goes into building a house besides just
permits. Cost of permits alone, the cost of inspections. Anyway, that's another tangent.
There's a lot of different components that go into it. So, I wouldn't worry too much about it, to be honest with you. I wouldn't let it stop me from investing.
Right.
That's for sure.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the same thing as, well, what if the stock market were to go down later in price? Should I buy any stock today? Well, you don't know what's going to happen in the future, so sure.
Yeah, to that analogy, I mean, we do know that the stock market fluctuates up and down, and we don't know what will happen in the future, but we do have historic data of what's happened in the past. And if we assume that over the long term, the future will generally reflect the past, I guess if we assume that history repeats itself, we can make some generalized assumptions about what the stock market will do in the future. As far as how that analogy applies to housing, I mean, it is certainly true that technology has changed housing.
It's much cheaper to build a house.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? Here's the thing.
It is much cheaper to build a house now even in inflation-adjusted dollars. Right. Houses are larger. They have more square footage than they used to in the 1940s and 50s, but the construction cost per square foot is substantially cheaper now than it was 50, 60 years ago.
Right.
Because of technology.
Right. We don't have to go and hand hew slate tiles for the roof. We just get a bundle of asphalt shingles delivered onto the rooftop, and a crew of guys just pounds them down in about, half a day or whatever.
Right. And we don't have to lath and plaster walls.
Right. Drywall.
Man. Drywall technology completely changed when walls were built from individual strips of lath. That was a lot of.
People had to tack these little tiny strips of wood onto every square or almost every square inch of a wall onto the studs, and then someone else had to come in and mix up some custom plaster. On site. A plaster person had to come and mix it, and then they had to trowel it on really perfectly smoothly. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine how, even a very skilled person a skilled plasterer, there's no way that can compete with putting up a drywall, and it doesn't today.
Right, exactly.
But we still buy and invest in houses, and people still make money investing in houses.
Exactly, despite the fact that the manufacturing cost of walls has come down significantly.
Right.
And the manufacturing cost of roofs has come down significantly because of these technological advancements that we have.
Yeah. So make a good decision today. And don't worry too much about that, because this is just part of an ongoing price decrease curve that's been going on for hundreds of years in housing.
Hey, did you enjoy this excerpt from the Afford Anything podcast? Then click to download our free ebook, Escape. You'll be taken to a page where you can enter your email for immediate access to everything you need to know about escaping the 9-to-5 grind to live life on your terms. And you can also subscribe with one simple click to get alerted when new videos are uploaded.